Intelligence officials believe that there are about 1,000 Westerners fighting for ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Among them, about 100 Americans. And it's the belief of U.S. intelligence officials that they are being trained and encouraged to carry out attacks when they return home. In fact, it's believed that ISIS veterans have already carried out 2 attacks in Europe.
The city of New York was and remains a high-value target for every terrorist and every group around the world seeking to make a name for themselves and, to be honest, kill as many people as possible. With the rise of ISIS in the Middle East, homegrown terrorism becoming more than a passing fad, and other American cities knowing full well they are targets as well, hard lessons need to be learned and examined once again, and new tactics must be part of the landscape. We will discuss this and much more from the law enforcement angle as we welcome into MidPoint the former police commissioner of the city of New York and at one time the Interior Interim Minister of Iraq. Kerik joins us today. Bernie, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Bernie, is there any doubt in your mind whatsoever that every terrorist group around the world right now, if they are of any power whatsoever, they have a map somewhere, whether it's mental or sitting in front of them, and it has the city of New York specifically with a big bullseye on it to this day, and really puts that bullseye over other American major cities as often as they can?
Ed, all you have to do is look at the history of New York since 9/11. I think we've quelled or stopped 13 different attempted attacks in New York City, and there are probably more than that that weren't made public. New York is the primary target. It's the biggest city in the nation. It has the economic capital of the world in the city itself. There has been their principal target for years, and it's going to remain that way for years to come. And I think the American people, law enforcement knows this, but I think the American people have to realize that, one, it's going to continue to be a target. We in the United States we're going to continue to be a target, and we have to continue to fight this enemy. And this is an enemy we've only really learned about in the last 15 years.
The enemy you're speaking about is ISIS. Your recent article in the Huffington Post, a threat far worse than al-Qaida. I will say this, talking to a lot of people, the initial reaction is certainly they're evil. Certainly they kill people wantonly and they have no respect whatsoever for human life. But here's what you'll get from a lot of Americans. They're on the other side of the world. They're all the way over in Iraq. It's a regionalized item. Bernie, I can't tell you how many times I have heard people say that in the last couple of weeks, and they are not that concerned about ISIS. How foolish is that of people to think?
Well, it's pretty bad considering that with John's report just now, he mentioned that the U.S. intelligence community believes right now we have probably more than 100 Americans fighting in this group in Iraq and Syria. That number, I would believe, is a lot bigger than 100, number one. Number two, we have people flooding this sick and demented interpretation of Islam, the people that believe the cause of ISIS. Those people are flooding this group from around the world to join, to fight this fight. Eventually, those people are going to be right here in the States, if they're not here already. And for anybody that doesn't believe that, that's foolish. I think they're naive. You have to realize we've had them here before, whether it was 9/11, whether it was the bombing in '93, the World Trade Center, whether it was the 13 different attempted attacks in New York or somewhere else in the country. They've been here. They're going to continue to be here. And this ISIS group, it's not, you know what? I'm making a mistake when I call it a group. It's not a group. It's a radical extremist army that is constantly growing, and it's going to continue to grow if we don't do something about it.
Bernie, how alarming is it to hear one thing? Now, in your article, you point out that most of the people joining ISIS are primarily poor, unemployed, and lack education. But if you come to America right now and you look at some of the Americans that are leaving to join terrorist groups, many of them are unemployed, but they don't lack education. We're actually seeing a number of people who are pretty smart who want to join these terrorist groups. That in itself is shocking to people, and that has to be something that I think needs to be taken into account. It's not just all a bunch of dummies that are heading for groups like ISIS. That's frightening.
Well, Ed, look, you have to go back to 9/11 and go back to the bombings in London in, I think, 2005, 2006, the Piccadilly Circus bombings. The bombers on 9/11, many of them were engineers. Osama bin Laden himself was an engineer. Many of them were doctors. Some of the bombers in London were extremely highly educated men that were out there to fight this cause that they have. This is a radical, extremist, and sort of demented interpretation of Islam. And they don't necessarily have to be poor. A lot of what we're seeing coming out of Syria and Iraq is the poor, uneducated. And also keep in mind, a lot of what we're seeing are those that are being threatened with violence if they don't join this group. So, people have to realize it's not just the poor. It's at all levels in the economic spectrum.
Bernie, in your opinion, what is the one main lesson that we still have not learned in order to protect our cities here in America and our citizens from an attack, whether it comes from al-Qaida, ISIS, or any other well-funded and well-planned out group?
You know what, Ed? Put the names aside. And this, I've written about this since I think 2003, 2004. Forget the names. Forget the names. There's about 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today, and most of them are law-abiding citizens. They are people, very religious people, good people. I am very close. I became very close to the family, the King of Jordan and his family. Very law-abiding citizens, good people, Muslims. But out of that 1.2 billion number, there is a group, and even if it's 1%, think of the numbers that have this radical extremist view that want the demise of Christians, of Jews, and basically anyone that is not of the Muslim faith. That's an enormous, enormous number. And I don't care if you call them al-Qaida, I don't care if you call them ISIS, I don't care what you call them. It doesn't make any difference. There's an enormous gathering out there, army of these men and women that want to see the demise of anything that is not the Muslim religion. And that battle is here to stay. So we're going to, basically, in essence, we're going to kill them or they're going to kill us. It's one or the other.
I got about 3 minutes left. I got two things I want to make sure I get your opinions on here. First of all, Eric Garner, the unarmed man who died in a chokehold in New York City, actually in Staten Island, New York. Why did this happen when officers are supposedly told don't use the chokehold when obviously it happened?
Well, I can't speak for the officers, and I think they'll go through an investigative process to see exactly what happened. The bottom line is, in Eric Garner's circumstance, if he complied with the arrest, it wouldn't have happened. That's not saying the use of force was not more than it should be. That's going to be up for a grand jury to decide. It's going to be investigated by the district attorney, may be investigated by the Justice Department. The problem is when you have non-compliance with an arrest, the officers have to use as much force as necessary to effect that arrest. And in this case, a death resulted. So it's really going to be up to the investigative authorities to determine why, how, and whether it was justified or not.
Did they use too much force?
It's not for me to say. I mean, I wasn't there. The problem you have is, and we are seeing this now in this recent shooting, and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Officers are deathly afraid of a confrontation when they're making an arrest because you have a firearm. If that suspect in any way grabs that firearm, you can be killed with your own gun. And I've had friends that have died as a result of making an arrest and being shot and killed with their own gun. That's a really deadly situation. It happens. And every officer that carries a badge and wears a gun has to deal with that. And that's something that they'll have to look at when they're investigating these issues. I've
got about a minute or so left here. You alluded to 18-year-old Michael Brown, Ferguson, Missouri. The police are not releasing the name of the officer who shot him. Does that surprise you at this point? Maybe not, certainly seeing what the local citizenry and how they have reacted after the shooting.
Well, normally the name would be released under normal circumstances. Evidently, there's something that the police, the authorities out there have, leads them to believe that there are death threats or some kind of threats against the officer and or his family. If that's the case, it would be irresponsible, really, to release the name. So I don't have a problem with them not releasing the name. The investigation's going to go forward. The police department, the state authorities, the federal authorities, they all know who the officer is. Releasing the name isn't going to benefit anything right now, and it may keep the officer and his family safe if these threats are credible.
About 10 seconds left. Do you think indeed that this will get a fair hearing and that we will get the truth?
I think so. Look, you got the police looking at it. You got the federal authorities looking at it. You know, once the witnesses are interviewed and the investigation's conducted, the truth will prevail.
And the thing here is always to wait until all the facts come out. I've been told that by law enforcement for so many years. It has been drilled into my head over and over again. You have to wait for everything to come out. Bernie, it is a pleasure to have you on the show, my friend. Thank you so much. We'll do it again.
Thank you, sir.
All right, take care. Later on this hour, why comedy is not always so funny to those who seek to make you laugh. And after the break, come on, what's wrong with a politician raising a couple of bucks here and there? Everything, if it takes the president away from protecting the nation. That is how some people feel about it. Both sides of the issue will be countered when we continue on MidPoint.